Zillia leaned toward the primary tactical display, her golden eyes tracking the heat signature of the creature as it blurred through the thermal vents. He was a jagged silhouette against the orange glow of the Reach, moving with a fluid, terrifying grace that defied every Caldoran manual on kinetic warfare. A pulse blade, scavenged from her own fallen elite, hummed in his grip like a trapped hornet. When the stasis field finally snagged him, slamming his body into a rigid, glowing cage, he didn't recoil in terror. He looked directly into the drone's lens. Bared teeth stained crimson and let out a roar that vibrated through the spire's command deck. It wasn't a plea for mercy, it was a promise. Before he was the wraith of Obsidian Reach, he was just a ghost in the glass. 17 cycles ago, Elias Thorne had fallen from the stars in a streak of dying metal. The orbital insertion had been a disaster, a shower of titanium and Terran bones scattered across the volcanic ridges. He should have died in the wreckage of his pod. In fact, by all Caldoran biological standards, the atmospheric pressure alone should have crushed his lungs. But humans were famously stubborn about their expiration dates. Elias crawled from the soot, his ranger uniform scorched, and looked up at the 3 moons of the Reach. He didn't have a long-range comms array. He didn't have a squad. He had a damaged survival kit and a serrated combat knife. The math of a dead man always favors the one who refuses to count. And Elias had stopped counting the moment he felt the heat of the glass canyons through his boots. He spent the first week as a shadow, and from her high perch in the spire of Aegis, Zillia watched the reports of phantom activity trickling in. Atmospheric stabilizers were failing in sectors they hadn't even patrolled. Supply caches were being drained of nothing but high-calorie rations and coolant. Her commanders called it equipment failure or seismic shifts. Zillia knew better. She began to spend her nights in the archives watching grainy footage of a lone figure navigating the razor-sharp terrain. He moved through the canyons where steel meets starlight, his hands often bleeding from the climb, yet his pace never slackened. There was a desperate poetry in his survival. He was an empire built on tradition, meeting a man built on improvisation. While her warriors waited for orders, Elias reacted to the wind. While they relied on targeting HUDs, he felt the vibration of the ground. The first spark of true fascination ignited when she saw him trap a Calderan scouting party. He hadn't used high explosives or heavy ordnance. He'd used the moon's own gravity. He lured them into a narrow gorge and used a captured snare charge to drop a shelf of volcanic glass, pinning them without a single shot fired. He didn't execute them. He took their data pads and disappeared into the steam. Zillia found herself resting her hand against the cold transparency of the observation deck, looking down into the dark, jagged world below. She was the High Archon, the voice of 1,000 years of rigid conquest, and yet she was drawn to the chaos of him. The most dangerous weapon in the galaxy isn't a fleet, it's a human with nothing left to lose. She had ordered the dragnet not to destroy him, Shamanum, but to bring the mystery to her feet. Now, as the Praetorian Guard dragged the stasis-locked ranger through the pressurized seals of her sanctum, the smell of ozone and burnt ozone filled the air. He was smaller than she imagined, and yet he seemed to fill the room. The stasis field didn't just hold his body, it seemed to vibrate with the sheer friction of his will. Zillia watched the shimmering blue light ripple every time his chest expanded, a rhythmic defiance that fascinated her more than any tactical victory ever could. She gestured for her guards to leave. They hesitated, their armor clicking in silent protest. But a single sharp look from their Archon sent them retreating into the shadows of the spire. She reached out, her fingers hovering an inch from the stasis barrier. Elias didn't blink. His eyes were dark, or shadowed by exhaustion and the dust of the glass canyons, but they held a clarity she'd never seen in her own kind. When she finally deactivated the field, he didn't lung for her throat. He simply slumped forward, catching himself on his hands, his breath ragged in the filtered air of the sanctum. It turned out that the silence between them was more dangerous than the war outside. In the weeks that followed, the sanctum became a laboratory of ideas. Zelia had spent her life perfecting the art of the inevitable, following the rigid paths laid down by centuries of hegemony tradition. Elias, however, lived in the cracks. He showed her how a single Terran with a broken radio could dismantle a planetary grid by simply refusing to follow the rules of engagement. He didn't speak of vengeance. He spoke of the sheer, exhausting cost of being enemies. Ironically, the bridge between them was built on the very scars they had given one another. Zelia found herself tracing the jagged line of a burn on his forearm, a mark from a Caldoran pulse rifle, while they debated the logistics of a shared trade route. Her skin was cool like polished obsidian, while his was a constant, radiating heat. Every time their hands brushed over a holographic map, a spark of something unscripted traveled up her spine. But it wasn't just physical. It was the way he looked at her when she proposed a ceasefire, his expression a mix of skepticism and a sudden fragile hope. She realized then that the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy wasn't his improvisation. It was his ability to make her question the very foundation of her empire. The Obsidian Accord wasn't written in a throne room. It was drafted in the quiet hours of the night, fueled by recycled coffee and the low hum of the spire's life support. It was a document born of exhaustion and an unconventional respect. And when the time came to present it to the hegemony, they didn't stand as captor and prisoner. They stood on the grand balcony of the palace, the three suns of the Reach setting in a slow, bruised purple over the horizon. Below them, the glass canyon sparkled, no longer a graveyard, but a gateway. Zelia felt the weight of her crown, heavy and cold, but then she felt his hand slide into hers. His skin was rough, calloused from the canyons, and his grip was steady. The crowd below fell silent, in a sea of golden eyes looking up at the impossible sight of a Terran Ranger and a High Archon joined in a union that defied every law of their stars. Truth is, the galaxy had expected a war that would burn the sky. Instead, it got two souls who were tired of the fire. As their fingers locked, signaling a permanent bond of blood and policy, Celia realized that while tradition was a fortress, improvisation was the only thing that could ever build a home.